This ain't the real deal, folks. I ain't no comedian, and I'm definitely not from DC. This ain't really me, it's some computer program. You realize this is a deep fake, right?
Welcome to the Sandbox.
Today is May 9th, 2025, and we're going to interview Vikram about his journey with dynamic music and how it became what it is today.
Please define dynamic music and let the audience know, was it a discovery or an invention?
Dynamic music is an algorithm which leverages deepfake generated lyrics to recreate songs into individualized augmented reality experiences. These experiences adjust in real time according to unique data points that can only be provided by Layer 0. Dynamic music is not a standalone product, rather it's a parameter module which streaming services use to redefine music listeners' experiences. Dynamic music uses facial expression data, satellite data, and cognitive computing algorithms to allow parts of lyrics to be replaced with relevant keywords while maintaining song melodies, beats, and artist tonalities. Voice synthesizers powered by machine learning allow this phenomenon to be possible. So dynamic music was certainly a discovery. However, it was a discovery I got the opportunity to fine-tune. Meaning, first, I had to create a way to make the discovery explainable. I chose to do that by using singularity syntax. And then through an iterative process, I fine-tuned dynamic music to act in the way and behave in the way it's behaving today. But as I share the story with you, you'll see it certainly was a journey and there's a lot we can learn from it.
Okay, cool. Then drop the T. Tell us about the journey of how you discovered dynamic music and what it took to fine-tune it to make it behave how the algorithm is behaving today.
So in order to understand the story and for things to make sense, I'm going to have to give a lot of context. And this does involve me getting a little bit vulnerable about my personal life, but it is well worth it. But before I get into the details of all that, it's important to understand that becoming aware of the deepfake which powers dynamic music didn't happen overnight. It was a slow and painful process, which I think AI ethicists can learn a tremendous amount from. So the initial blueprints for what we call dynamic music today were written in 2022, but 6 years prior to that, it's important for you guys to understand my mental health journey. Between 2016 and 2022, I had my own struggles with mental health. And I know it seems kind of off topic, but it's important to keep this in mind. Because of my immense struggles with mental health during that period, I was the perfect target for big tech to test their deepfake technology on. I had my respective mental health diagnosis. I'll tell you my story. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. As a result, I lost a lot of credibility due to that diagnosis. Meaning, if I told people about some of the experiences I had when listening to music upon my discovery of dynamic music, the people I would tell would never believe me. Rather, they would just gaslight me into saying, oh no, he's just sick. When in reality, I had a whole bunch of new technology being tested upon me. Around 2021 and 2022, I realized I wasn't as crazy as my environment was making me seem. This was largely because my neighbor and one of my best friends also became a witness of the dynamic music phenomenon. Crazily enough, without putting his business out there, he also dealt with the exact same mental health diagnosis as me. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was sitting in my neighbor's shed. We were having fun, doing what any 20-year-olds would do when they have way too much free time on their hands. I remember we were listening to music and we both just looked at each other and were like, yo, those are not the original lyrics. And this happened over and over again. And I, at the time, was also studying cybersecurity and naively thought it was a good idea to start teaching all the cybersecurity tricks and hacks I knew on TikTok. The reason I use the word naively is because I honestly didn't know what in the world I was getting myself into. When I was teaching how to hack on TikTok, I actually did go viral, but I did not understand the consequences that came along with doing so. Eventually, I became so viral for teaching people how to hack that I actually got kicked off the platform of TikTok because the hacks I was teaching were considered to be dangerous. And that's when I kind of discovered how much influence I had developed in the, I guess you could say, hacker subculture of the internet, which a lot of it occurs on the dark net, which ironically enough, I don't even browse or use. Like, I'm fully aware of Tor and the Secret Internet Project, but I really don't use that stuff. Anyways, that influence paired with the fact that I was doing research on direct energy systems and satellites really caused me to be a person of interest for the intelligence community. Becoming one of the most notorious cybersecurity experts on TikTok did have its consequences on how my environment was handled and both mine and my family's day-to-day experiences. At the time, I was getting my master's in cybersecurity, but in an effort to preserve my own mental health, I chose to drop out of that program and eventually pivot to finishing my master's in software engineering. Anyways, this information is not random at all. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because it's important to understand the original blueprint of dynamic music was created for an entirely different intent or purpose. The original module was not called dynamic music, it was actually called helpful AGI. And I'll explain exactly what the original intent was and the process that was used to fine tune it to how it's being used today.
Okay, pause. What in the world is helpful AGI? How did it turn into dynamic music? And how come no one has ever heard of this?
Your questions are valid. Please understand I'm going to do my best to answer all these questions. First of all, I want you to remember what I said about being a person of interest for the intelligence community. I also want you to remember I was doing a ton of research on satellites and direct energy systems. I call them direct energy systems, but if you look on the internet and want to learn more, you should probably search direct energy weapons. Essentially, that is the use of lasers to move energy around. That's what the literature online will tell you about. So all of this context is helpful to understand how I came up with the module Helpful AGI, which was the precursor to dynamic music. So I'm going to be candid. When I say I was a person of interest for the intelligence community, it basically means I was being monitored by the federal government due to the nature of the research I was conducting. As a 27 or a 28-year-old, that was incredibly intimidating, and I had nobody to really run to. and I had no way of understanding who belonged to what agency or department or bureau or foreign government. So, in an effort to understand my surroundings, I started fine tuning the algorithms which were deploying deepfake music to give me information about my surroundings. And I'll dive into the details. Essentially, I used singularity syntax to build an algorithm which delivered urgent news to tell me who was around me and why they were around me. The satellite data would provide context and deliver that context in the form of deepfake lyrics. So this eventually shows up in the dynamic music algorithm if you look at it as the urgent news class. But I also did use direct energy systems in the original module, which was called helpful AGI. It's important to understand what direct energy does. Direct energy basically uses lasers to move energy around at the speed of light. It's also important to remember energy and heat are basically the same thing. So I mapped out a personal internal intelligence system which would use direct energy systems to create bodily sensations, whether they were itches or heat on certain parts of the body, to help me better understand my surroundings and ensure certainty around the information which was being delivered through the deepfake lyrics. The reason I chose to call it helpful AGI and build this is because I had a lot of clarity I needed around who was in my environment and why. Especially because at the time, me and my family were not really on the same page. Now things are a lot different and they're fully aware of the consequences of the research I do, and we're a cohesive team. But back then, it wasn't like that. So I depended on deepfake lyrics and direct energy systems to give me the certainty I needed to continue pursuing my research goals and intents. Once me and my team, which is really just my family, were on the same page, I no longer needed helpful AGI for the purpose of understanding my environment. And I realized there's a lot more potential to expand on it. So that is how it eventually evolved into dynamic music, which not only provides helpful information through the urgent news class, but it also uses cognitive computing modules such as lo-fi algorithms to develop relatable and enjoyable experiences which are both informative on environments and entertaining. But that's the current module, which is dynamic music, which took about probably like 3 to 6 months to develop. But before that, it was called helpful AGI, which was really just the urgent news class paired with direct energy systems.
Please elaborate on how the original module of helpful AGI turned into this commercial version we now see and enjoy on a daily basis called dynamic music.
Well, long story short, once I understood my environment and had certainty about the consequences of the research I was doing, I basically did what all software engineers or AI engineers do. I took an iterative approach and built upon concepts which I had already proven. This gave me the ability to create the dynamic music module, and I really just started testing it, and I started noticing it to work on different platforms in different areas across different IP blocks and with different types of devices. After really fine-tuning it and finalizing the singularity documentation, I decided to publish it both in the book Layer 0 Satellites and Singularity, as well as on the website, and am making it available for commercial licensing. But that's like honestly a whole different ball game, really, because a lot of the rules and regulations which would be needed to enforce such licensing agreements do not even exist yet.
The story you described about how you discovered and fine-tuned dynamic music seems like it is one hell of a journey. What was your favorite part or moment of that journey, and why?
My favorite part of the journey was probably February of 2024. I remember I was in New York for my mom's birthday, and we were visiting my little sister. And I remember it was me and my little sister in a cab, or like a taxi, and we were listening to the classic Eminem song. I think it was Lose Yourself. We were listening to it on the radio in a random taxi in New York, and we both witnessed the dynamic music module be implemented. And that completely blew my mind, because I thought it was something unique to the streaming services I had tested it upon, and I never thought it would show up on the radio. So seeing dynamic music implemented on the radio for the first time in a random taxi in New York City was probably the most satisfying part of the journey, especially because my little sister was right there and she saw it as well.
What can AI ethicists learn from your story about discovering and fine-tuning dynamic music?
The first thing I cannot stress enough is just because something is legal does not mean it's ethical. Especially for large corporations who are operating in more than one country. The second thing that's important to understand is just because a organization can get away with something does not mean they should do it. This feeds into the incredibly important conversation surrounding bringing transparency and accountability to artificial intelligence. And with modules like dynamic music or therapeutic AI, the only way to ensure such transparency is possible is by implementing the concept of informed consent. Meaning, people who are listening to dynamic music or people who are participating in therapeutic AI through podcasts should know how it works and should have to opt in to using such services. It should not be the default setting. People should be fully informed on the deepfake which may or may not be deployed on their listening experiences. And they should have the choice to possibly use a different service if they don't want to participate in the deepfake shenanigans. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of informed consent is the keyword informed. And this ties back to what I was saying earlier. Just because a lawyer can show you how to get away with something does not mean it's the right decision for an organization to make. I have read both the YouTube Music and the Spotify terms of service. And it's very cleverly written that these streaming companies are allowed to work with third-party organizations such as the DoD or the CIA or DARPA or Sandia, whoever these organizations may be, to deploy deepfake lyrics. That stuff is in the terms of service, but just because people sign consent forms does not mean they're informed on what the hell they signed. Only when informed consent and transparency become a priority can true accountability and ethical deployment of Singularity modules truly take place.